I was going to say, my name is Heathcote Williams. Thank you very much indeed for coming. And I was also going to explain the reason for the existence of these two books. It is that I thought I'd try my hand at harpooning. Fortunately, two suitable targets surfaced. A pair of blonde beasts, bloviating blowhards, and two of the most unsuitable and unlikely candidates for public office in the United Kingdom and the United States, who through their pathological chicanery have managed to get themselves elected, to the consternation and confusion of many. The distinguished actor and member of Ken Campbell's improvisatory group, the School of Night, is currently sharpening his filleting knife as we speak. He will line up Brexit Boris in the crosshairs, after which I'll take a few pops at the US President. It's my very great pleasure to present Mr. Alan Cox.
This is the first chapter of Brexit Boris, From Mayor to Nightmare, published by the Public Reading Rooms. Bubbles of dissent and suspicion. Some 10,000 years ago, Britain was physically attached to the European landmass, and 1,200 years ago, a pan-European identity was established amongst Europe's inhabitants by Charlemagne. It had its own euro currency on a silver standard, namely the mark. It's been said of Charlemagne that, as if by a flick of a switch, he turned on the light that had ended the Dark Ages. Europe's prehistory makes the protestations of the Little Englanders, as George Orwell would doubtless have called the anxious xenophobes who've been wishing to withdraw from the European experiment, seem ludicrous. Despite the calculations of the various number crunchers of the Leave Europe Now and Brexit brigades in Britain, they are surely irrelevant to the overriding importance of there being another and a qualitatively different power bloc in the world. A power bloc which, in the words of the preamble to the 2005 European Constitution, is intended to draw inspiration from the cultural, religious, and humanist inheritance of Europe, from which have developed the universal values of the inviolable and inalienable rights of the human person: freedom, democracy, equality, and the rule of law. Severe criticism can be levelled at the European Union, particularly against its austerity and its cuts agenda. It is undemocratic and remote from the lived experience of its peoples. Despite its many failings, however, European courts have nonetheless enforced important environmental legislation that might never have seen the light of day if the issues had been left to individual and sovereign parliaments. European courts have also upheld a spirit of fair play and equal rights in relation to the needs of Europe's labour forces. They've capped bankers' bonuses, and Europe has a unique convention on human rights, which acknowledges man's freedom of movement. Europe has, after all, only come into existence thanks to invasions of hunter-gatherers from Africa. Most importantly, perhaps, the European Union has had, post-World War II, an historic and a constitutional desire to prevent and resolve conflict. Conflicts having ravaged Europe with increasing devastation for 1,000 years. However, in certain parts of Europe, there are bubbles of resistance, feverish bubbles of nationalistic dissent and exaggerated suspicion, which threaten the European ideal, as symbolized in its anthem taken from Beethoven's Ode to Joy, an anthem that includes such lines as "Unity is our future, Long live Europe, come what may, and North and South will work together just as friends and neighbours should. East and West will grow together, brotherhood and sisterhood. In its desire to absent itself from such improving, albeit native sentiments, Britain has lately become infected by a self-regarding miasma, made manifest by the appearance of the UK Independence Party, a kind of Waitrose version of the BNP, together with a retrospective and scowling rump within the Tory party, both of which hark back to another ungenerous age, where there was no need to take cognizance of Johnny Foreigner. Chapter 2. Enter National Treasure Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson has been the most vocal of those lining up to wrench the country they claim to love away from the dastardly clutches of a Europe which they see as undermining their sovereignty and hence their own power. They do not want to love their neighbour. They want to divorce him. Johnson is someone whom the right-wing media are fond of describing as a national treasure. He has a bumbling, blustering manner which some find engaging and others tiresome. He'll unfailingly ruffle his hair before a TV appearance in order to give the calculated impression of harmless eccentricity. He specialises in self-deprecation, which some find winning and others calculated. Johnson has admitted that he employs self-deprecation as a manipulative ploy to disarm his potential enemies. In an interview with the American TV channel CNBC, he declared, "Self-deprecation is a very cunning device. All about understanding that basically people regard politicians as a bunch of shysters. So you've got to be understood. That's what it's all about, I suppose." In the light of what lies behind his muddled facade, namely a ruthless and often cruel ambition, together with an elitism and a ferocious temper when challenged, it is wrong-headed to describe such a man as a national treasure. Johnson is a man who values himself and his own agenda much more highly than he does the nation or the nation's interest. His friends say of him approvingly, as if it was a virtue, "Boris is about Boris." They're saying this, of course, because they admire the man's remorseless self-promotion, and perhaps because, as enthusiastic members of the cult of Boris, they look forward to bathing in his stardust should he become Prime Minister. For that's what he most assuredly set his heart on, and what, in his madder moments, he has spoken of as his destiny, if not his birthright. The European issue has been the trampoline upon which Boris Johnson thought he could bounce his 17-stone self into number 10 Downing Street. Beano Boris, or bonking Boris, as the satirical magazine Private Eye, always at a loss as to why anyone should take Johnson seriously, calls him, has made his pitch for the top job his life's work. The prospect has not been universally well received. In a guest column for the New Statesman, Boris's former colleague on the Daily and Sunday Telegraph, Simon Heffer, claims that even Boris's senior colleagues dread Tory activists handing him the keys to Downing Street. Heffer points out that it is little wonder that the campaign to leave the European Union was so thrilled to receive Johnson's belated and confused endorsement last month. However, he did what the campaign views as the right thing for the wrong reason. When Johnson worked with me in the mid-1990s, an Oxford contemporary warned me about him, saying he was the most rampantly ambitious person he had ever met, and that he believed in nothing apart from himself. So, skipping a few chapters. So this is from chapter 8, Betrayal Covered by a Wink and a Smile. While Boris Johnson may be a cult figure to some of his fellow Tories, for others his excesses are too much. The former Conservative MP and aide to Margaret Thatcher, Matthew Parris, launched a scathing attack on the pro-Brexit mayor, denouncing him for alleged dishonesty, vacuity, sexual impropriety, and veiled homophobia. Somebody has to call a halt to the gathering pretense that if only you're sufficiently comical in politics, you can laugh everything off, Parris wrote. Incompetence is not funny. Policy vacuum is not funny. A careless disregard for the truth is not funny. Advising old mates planning to beat someone up is not funny. Abortions and gagging orders are not funny. Creeping ambition in a jester's cap is not funny. Vacuity posing as merriment, cynicism posing as savviness, a wink and a smile covering for betrayal. These things are not funny. Parris describes the mayor as a lacklustre politician and claims that Johnson was unable to defend his recent claims about the European Union in front of the Treasury Select Committee in Parliament. Andrew Tirry, the committee chair, accused Johnson of exaggerating to the point of misrepresentation. It was not the case, as Johnson had maintained, that the EU had banned the British from recycling tea bags, nor that children under 8 had been prevented from blowing up balloons, nor had the EU regulated on the size of coffins, and nor were EU regulations costing Britain 600 million a day. Parris added, but there's a pattern to Boris's life, and it isn't the lust for office, or for applause, or for susceptible women that mark out this pattern in red warning ink. It's the casual dishonesty, the cruelty, the betrayal, and beneath the betrayal, the emptiness of real ambition. The ambition to do anything useful with office once it is attained. He added for good measure, Boris Johnson has killed the distinction between reality and satire. There's a section in which Boris Johnson is described as Trump with a thesaurus, which maybe leads us on to...
I do a couple of Trumps.
Do a couple of Trumps.
Okay. This is called Donald J. Trump, President of the US Plutocratic Pornocracy. Prefaced by a quote from Trump himself. I don't like to analyse myself because I might not like what I see. On buying a beauty spot in Scotland for a golf course and for luxury condominiums, Trump notices some old houses on the horizon and he orders them bulldozed to oblivion. On seeing a woman that he desires, he oafishly recommends grabbing her pussy. He boasts that, my fame lets me take liberties, my fame allows me to abuse her. Trump's grandfather ran brothels in the Yukon, and to his grandson people are also for sale. Trump's ego tells him he has supernatural powers, and that almost nothing is beyond the pale. I will deport 12 million Latinos, Donald Trump insists. This buddy of asset strippers and union busters, a charlatan who papers over his character's cracks with bank loans and with megalomaniac bluster. Trump was a casino owner, a synonym for gangster, a suitable past for the president of casino capitalism, who boasts about who he's been able to shake down and who also represents a homegrown neo-fascism. Trump's a demagogue who's prone to magical thinking with a compulsion to build concrete penises, upon which his name appears in enormous letters, and whose robotic staff repeat, he's a genius. He has pretended to be anti-establishment, and to be standing up for the little guy. Yet without Wall Street and the Deutsche Bank, this exhibitionist parasite would die. He's a slave to his monumental indebtedness. He owes $600 million. But now that he's president, he can pay his creditors, the mob and their sinister callers. While doubtless remaining reluctant to pay taxes, for he regards tax evasion as an art, when challenged about his not filing tax returns, he brags, "That makes me smart." He's risen to power on the magniloquent claim that he'll make America great, while representing the lowest common denominator of his country's racist hate. In 1992, the Casino Control Commission fined him $200,000 for removing Afro-American card dealers from his Plaza Hotel's casino to appease the racism of the Plaza's big-spending gamblers. Trump would disparage his black casino employees as lazy. "I've got black accountants, and isn't it funny?" he'd say. "Black guys come counting my money. I hate it. The only kind of people I want is short guys that wear yarmulkes every day." When Donald and Ivana came to the casino, recalls Kip Brown, an employee at Trump's castle, the bosses would order all the black people off the floor, he told the New Yorker in a 2015 article. Regarding an African-American president as an affront to his Aryan sensibility, Trump became vocal in the birther movement, questioning Obama's legitimacy. Trump failed to disavow the Ku Klux Klan when they supported his candidacy. He'd airily pretend he didn't know who they were, with an ignorance approaching lunacy. Donald J. Trump has been elected president of the U.S.'s plutocratic pornocracy. A plot twist, and suddenly the whole world is having to adjust to his squalid reality. He believes women should suffer punishment if they decide to have abortions. He sees life as conquest and victory and winning, as if in a childish competition. In a half-hearted apology for mocking women's looks, Trump says he does it to be entertaining, unaware that he himself is overweight and bright orange and hardly qualifies as an oil paint. "I'd bring back a hell of a lot worse than waterboarding," says Trump, who advocates torture. "When I say they'll do as I tell them, they'll do as I tell them," is how he plans to overcome any legal stricture. 50 billion tons of carbon dioxide fall annually on the Earth, causing deadly climate change. Yet Trump says he'll cancel the life-saving treaties the international community has arranged. So, more earthquakes will be on the horizon, and extreme heat will now be inevitable. One man's hot air will have consequences as air becomes less and less breathable. "We need some global warming, it's freezing," Trump would joke while he was out campaigning. Then America's emperor repeats his strident rhetoric and is insistent. "The swamp needs draining." He threatens to attack ISIS with nuclear weapons, to use a nuclear sledgehammer to crack a nut, unable to see that every Trump tower would be transformed into a radioactive mud hut. Donald Trump is really Donald Drumpf, to give him his ancestral and risible name. It suggests dumbness, even the passing of wind, as well as the merciful transience of fame. The second one I wrote as a double bill, but half of it is redundant because it covered Hillary, the Iron Lady, and dripped with blood. So I've skipped that, but I'll read the Trump passage. The total obscenity of the American dream comes to fruition in Donald J. Trump. We need a leader that wrote The Art of the Deal, he declares on his presidential stump. What's wrong is that Trump's best-selling volume on the virtues of property speculation wasn't written by him, but by one Tony Schwartz, now dreading Trump as leader of his nation. The Art of the Deal established Donald J. Trump as the archetypal successful tycoon. Schwartz presented him in the best possible light, striving to hide a poisonous buffoon. I put lipstick on a pig, Schwartz later would say when overcome with remorse, for he branded Trump as a winning charmer, one that an electorate could endorse. Whereas, in his presidential run-up, the Donald would soon reveal his true colours. It doesn't really matter what the media write, Trump says, as long as you got a young piece of ass. Despite self-enchanted claims to be a self-made man, Trump's wealth has been largely inherited from Father Fred, a slum landlord and speculator, who was once notoriously prosecuted by the U.S. Justice Department for refusing to rent to African Americans. To do so clashed with the beliefs Fred gleaned from his attendance at KKK rallies. It's said the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, and so the son is true to Fred's prejudice, with Trump's plans to exclude Mexicans with a wall and to make Mexico pay for the privilege. Trump's first wife, Ivana, famously claimed that Trump was a fan of Adolf Hitler, and that he kept a copy of Hitler's speeches, My New Order, in his bedside cabinet. The beauty of me is that I'm very rich, says the gilded toad. The point is, you can never be too greedy. My IQ is one of the highest, and you all know it. He then changes gear to become simply creepy. I've said that if Ivanka weren't my daughter, perhaps I would be dating her. If he can sink to using incest as a come-on to gain the White House, what's to stop such a perv killing her, or perhaps eating her? When the publisher Random House gave him an advance of $500,000 to write his autobiography, they sent a mock-up to Trump Towers for his approval. They'd not held back on the typography. They'd featured his name, Trump, in gold block capitals, with him being depicted as a new Alexander the Great. Please make my name much bigger, responded the man, whose vampirish megalomania was his favorite trait. Schwartz saw Trump as driven by an insatiable hunger for money, praise, and celebrity. He described him by saying, he's a living black hole. And he viewed his mindset with hilarity. Trump would insist that an apartment in one of his latest developments had been sold to a prince or a sultan to add kudos to his establishment. Prince Charles has bought several, he'd insist, although there wasn't a shred of evidence. But snobs and New York sheep fell for his ploy, and Trump gained his golden recompense. This mega-vulgarian who blows his own trumpet so hard you think he's likely to blow a fuse, this red-faced Aryan with his combed-over hair, is a charlatan whose every game plan is a ruse. He has 3,000 outstanding lawsuits pending. He takes rides on the Lolita Express to a Caribbean island filled with underage girls, thanks to Jeffrey Epstein, a slave to excess, a convicted sex criminal, friends with Prince Andrew, Bill Clinton, and other white trash sleazeballs. Trump joined him as a sex tourist and an orgy goer, with a penchant for raping 13-year-old girls. One alleged victim, not named in court documents, claims that during one, quote, savage sexual attack, Trump tied her to a bed, then proceeded to forcibly rape her, while she loudly pleaded for him to stop. The billionaire, quote, screamed that he would do whatever he wanted. Trump struck her with his open hands, then threatened the girl. Were she ever to reveal any of the details of the sexual abuse, she and her family, quotes, would be physically harmed if not killed. At the age of 22, Trump had 4 military deferments to get out of fighting in Vietnam. He claimed he'd had an uncomfortable bone in one of his feet, yet couldn't remember which foot caused the problem. But his millionaire father was instrumental in this great patriot avoiding Vietnam was also the truth, leading Trump to say flippantly that his personal Vietnam was to have avoided sexual diseases in his youth. Trump's buildings are erected by conning, unpaid craftsmen. His Trump University peddles Mickey Mouse degrees. Here's a man who declares war on political correctness, as it stops him from abusing whomsoever he pleases. Foul-tempered and violent, he singles out hecklers to be beaten up or pepper-sprayed by bodyguards. "I'd like to punch him on the face," he says of a protester. This Neanderthal and virulently racist blowhard. Now imagine Donald Trump in the White House, conjuring his self-serving lies out of thin air, with his sleek little fingers fondling the nuclear codes. The demagogue grins and mutters, "Do I dare?" "It's freezing and snowing in New York. We need global warming," is Trump's take on an apocalyptic predicament. It's impossible to keep him focused on any topic, says Schwartz, other than his own self-aggrandizement. "All Muslims should leave the United States now," says Trump, on a populist roll. The U.S. father of a Muslim soldier killed in action condemns Trump as a black soul. The last poem is called The Statue of Liberty's Burqa. And by way of preface, it's perhaps worth noting that Muslims held Spain for 3 times as long as America has existed as a nation. And this one is quite short. The Statue of Liberty's Burqa. The President is obsessed with deporting Arabs, although by a superb comic irony, it was an Arab who modelled for the United States his icon, namely the Statue of Liberty. The sculptor's monument was initially designed for the opening of the Suez Canal. The original depicted an Arab woman holding a torch. It was destined for the canal's southern portal. His first drawings show, quotes, a gigantic female fellah or Arab peasant, with a veil modestly hiding her lips. The sculptor told Egypt's ruler that she represented progress, a beacon to light the way for oncoming ships. Unfortunately for the artist, Frederic Auguste Bartholdi, Egypt's bankrupt Khedive or ruler couldn't afford its installation, but undeterred, Bartholdi recycled it and offered it to New York to commemorate the American Revolution. Its first title had been Egypt Carrying the Light to Asia, but now the figure's veil would be removed, and for his prospective US clients, Bartholdi called it Liberty, Enlightening the World. But despite Bartholdi tweaking the flowing Arab garments and turning them into Greco-Roman dress, it's still a huge stone Arab that occupies New York Harbor, making fun of the president's petty-mindedness and of his paranoia, for far more Americans die as a result of their falling out of bed or being stung by bees rather than being killed by terrorists, never mind fellow citizens shooting them dead. Despite the most worthless president in US history wishing to banish all Arabs from his shores, an Arab giantess in New York is welcoming migrants and giving the lie to his immigration laws. However much the president may demonize Arabs, here's one who's rooted to the ground, making a better job of symbolizing American liberty without her having to utter a sound.
So, Drumpf pops up in chapter 4, which is entitled From Mare to Nightmare, from which the book takes its title. Remembering Boris. Ever unpredictable, opportunistic and volatile, Johnson rivals Donald Trump, to whom he bears a certain similarity. Johnson has been described as Trump with a thesaurus, and he shares with Trump a shameless ability to contradict himself and yet to believe that he's right on each occasion. They also share the notion that they have a license to lie, particularly if they can come up with a vivid enough excuse to mask their deception. The master in college at Eton, Martin Hammond, would say of Johnson, "Boris sometimes seems affronted when criticised. I think he honestly believes that it is churlish of us not to regard him as an exception." Famously, Johnson would characterise reports he had cheated on his wife with a colleague of The Spectator, Petronella Wyatt, as an inverted pyramid of piffle. This oddly phrased denial was to no avail, however, when the affair was confirmed by Petronella Wyatt's mother, and when various friends of Wyatt inconveniently briefed newspapers that she'd had 2 abortions, and that she'd understandably felt betrayed by the then Tory arts spokesman. Johnson, instinctively dishonest, was clear from their relationship. Faced with one of Petronella's pregnancies, he said she should have an affair with someone and say it was their child. His dishonesty colours another relationship with one Helen McIntyre, whom Johnson appointed as his arts advisor when he was mayor. Johnson, dubbed our Berlusconi by Ian Hislop, has had a child with McIntyre, but despite the glaring evidence of the child's albino-cum-blonde hair of its father, Johnson insists that the child's hair is ginger. It isn't. In 2013, the Court of Appeal dismissed an attempt by a former mistress to stop publication of information about her child with Johnson, ruling that his recklessness was a public interest matter which the electorate was entitled to know when considering his fitness for high public office. The judge might have ruled that his dishonesty too could be construed as a matter of public concern. It was certainly thought of to be a concern to his former editor on the Daily Telegraph, the military historian Max Hastings. Boris is a gold medal egomaniac. I would not trust him with my wife, nor, from painful experience, with my wallet. It is unnecessary to take any moral view about his almost crazed infidelities, but it is hard to believe that any man so conspicuously incapable of controlling his own libido is fit to be trusted with controlling the country. He is also a far more ruthless and frankly nastier figure than the public appreciates. And so, to bring things to a close, this is the final chapter of Brexit Boris, chapter 11, The Man with No Moral Compass. Theresa May, arriving at Downing Street on the 13th of July 2016 to take up her new role as Prime Minister, vowed to lead a government that worked for all, and not just for the privileged few, as she puts it. To this end, and on the same day, she appointed one of the most privileged few in the country to serve her as Foreign Secretary. The undiplomatic Boris Johnson is to be Britain's leading diplomat. Will he be able to restrain himself from trying out his prize-winning spectator limerick about the Turkish head of state on President Erdogan, in which a young fellow from Ankara, who was a terrific wankerer until he sowed his wild oats with the help of a goat? The world awaits the re-release of Boris's bestial squib with bated breath, for no gaffe is now off limits. The most indiscreet man in public life will now also be in charge of MI6 and GCHQ. A man with no moral compass is in charge of a senior department of military intelligence, and a lying journalist becomes the chief panjandrum of the donut-shaped surveillance centre. On learning this farcical news, the Daily Mirror suggested that Britain's credibility will now be hanging by a thread, and it illustrated its front page story with a photograph of the ludicrous Johnson stranded in mid-air on a zip wire in a publicity stunt that went wrong. The Mirror was right, and the world reacted with bewildered horror, disbelief, and ridicule. When the US State Department spokesman Mark Toner heard the news, he struggled to keep a straight face, and the American political scientist Ian Bremmer hoped that it might all be a joke. Maybe the Brits are just having us on. We probably deserve it. The Berlin correspondent of German public broadcaster ZDF, Nicole Deichmann, tweeted, "So, Boris Johnson, Foreign Minister. British humour." ZDF's Brussels correspondent Anne Gelinek said that Johnson was properly hated and was seen as the head of a campaign of lies in the EU's headquarters. Simone Peter, co-leader of the German Green Party, likened Johnson's appointment to trusting the cat to keep the cream. The French Foreign Minister, Jean-Marc Ayrault, said despondently, "During the campaign, he lied a lot to the British people. I need a partner with whom I can negotiate and who is clear, credible, and reliable." His appalled reaction was echoed by Johnson's audience when, shortly after his appointment, Johnson appeared at the French embassy, only to be soundly booed and jeered. Germany's Foreign Minister, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, condemned Johnson's conduct in the run-up to the EU referendum as deceitful and reckless, and he called the new Foreign Secretary's behaviour ungeheuerlich, meaning outrageous. People in the UK are experiencing a rude awakening after irresponsible politicians first lured the country into Brexit, and then, once the decision was made, decided to bolt from responsibility, and instead go off and play cricket. Frans Timmermans, the European Commission's Vice President, said that Johnson's comments had been spreading hatred in a way he wouldn't have believed possible in Britain. Meanwhile, Boris Johnson's neighbours, feeling the need to apologise on his behalf, fixed a notice to the railings of his house, which read, in capital letters, "Sorry, world." By contrast, at his first Foreign Office press conference, held jointly with US Secretary of State John Kerry, Boris Johnson gave his latest reworking of "sorry, but not sorry." When challenged about his insults to men, women, races, cities, countries, and continents, Johnson arrogantly declared, "It would really take me too long to engage in a fully global itinerary of apology to all concerned." Theresa May once spoke of her regret that the Tory party was known as the Nasty Party. Her ill-starred appointment ensured that its malign character would be maintained for some time to come, and it may have taken Boris Johnson one slavering step closer to realising his lifelong dream of becoming Prime Minister.